Thank you everyone for joining us for this webinar, Mixing In-Ear Monitors Volume 2, Advanced Concepts, presented by Ashton Parsons. My name is Mallory Misnarsic and I'm the project manager here at Harman. A few things before we get started. Everyone on the call is muted to keep down noise levels during this webinar. However, there is a Q&A function where you can submit questions to the presenter and he'll try to answer as many as possible at the end. This webinar will also be recorded and a link will be made available a few days after this presentation. We do have a number of other webinars taking place over the next few months for audio, lighting, video, and control. We encourage you to take a look at the different webinars in our Learning Sessions workshop series on pro.harman.com, as well as visiting Harman Professional Training to see our many on-demand and certification courses that are available to you for free. And now I'd like to introduce you to Ashton, the presenter for today's webinar. Ashton is an audio engineer specializing in mixing for in-ear monitors. He has worked for rock legends and younger bands ranging from Disturbed and I Prevail to Fifth Harmony and Vespera. He also operates a studio in Michigan offering post-production mixing and album production. And now I'll pass it over to you, Ashton.
Hi everyone, welcome back to my home in beautiful Tecumseh, Michigan. I hope you're all well. I hope you're all staying safe and healthy and all that good stuff. For those of you who are joining me again from my part one, welcome back. For those of you just joining and hanging out with me for the first time, welcome. Today we're going to cover a range of topics that a lot of my previous course sort of dictated by all the wonderful Q&A we had after my presentation. So I want to thank a lot of you guys for inspiring this part two. We're going to cover a few topics such as talkbacks, bleed, relationships with in-ears and physical wedges and side fills on stage, as well as a couple other things. Concepts like dealing with multiple singers, paying attention, stuff like that. So what we'll get to right away is a topic that was very consistent with the Q&A last time, and that was the discussion about talkbacks and how to manage them. So for my experience, what I find with talkbacks is that they're a very essential part of a monitor mixer's job. Some of you are probably not great at reading lips. I'm not. A lot of the musicians I work for have pretty great beards, or they're dancing around on stage, and you know, if you missed something, you're not going to get it. But sometimes they can run over to a backline tech on stage, and that backline tech can get on their mic and talk to you. Now, how do I manage listening to my Q mix and talkbacks? Well, I'm glad you asked. It's going to be a discussion about matrices today. There's going to be a lot of that coming up. We're also going to be talking about spares. That's another fun thing, but let's stick to talkbacks. So when I'm on Disturbed, I have no less than 10 talkbacks. For some people that might be a small number. I know some bands have way more than that, but for Disturbed we've got 10, or just about under. Let's see, front of house, stage right tech, drum tech, drummer, stage left tech, myself, my shoutback, lighting, so we have 8. Oh, and pyro, so 9. So how do I manage all that? I have them all bus to a matrix. And so what that allows me to do is hear my Q mix, my solo bus, and hear all, well, thankfully not that much chatter. If there was a lot of chatter, that would be a separate mix for the backline techs to talk to each other, or I would give them an A-B switcher, which is how I use my shoutback to front of house. How that's routed is we take my talkback, so it's just one microphone, into a switcher that will, when you press down, that's the B output. When you release, that's the A output. So when I press the button, it only goes to my front of house engineer when I'm talking to him. If I release, it goes to everybody. Now, during the show, what I have is I have it set to a snapshot that will allow me to talk to certain people. I have one that's set for just talk to this band member, talk to all band members, talk to all backline, talk to everybody and anything. I'm not going to show you how to do that on this desk because that's going to be another advanced topic for another time. But that's one way to manage all your talkbacks. You can also keep in a user layer your matrix sends. So that way you hear certain things or send certain things, and it's always going to be on one of your pages. So in this case, I would have it on my right screen because to me, my left side is typically where I'm looking, because if you're on stage left, you're going to be looking downstage at your number one, which is 90% of the time going to be your lead singer. And so when you're on stage left, typically you'll be looking towards the left of your desk to see the downstage edge. That's not always the case, but I find that 99% of the time that's the case for me. So that would be my way of dealing with talkbacks, is matrices. And that way they're always there. And, you just have to also make sure that or your backline guys or whoever is on the talkbacks know that during the show, they're only to be used in case of emergencies. That being said, I've got my lighting guys during sound check. He's on there, so I can just say, hey, is your mix okay? Because I send a mix to him, which is delayed by the time that it takes the PA to get to him. So typically, I will find that millisecond delay from the system engineer after he smarts the PA. That way there's no delay. But also, now that I think about it, I've only done that once. Most of the time I keep the mix direct without delay. That way his lighting cues are always on time and not delayed by the distance he is from the stage. So that's something to keep in mind if you ever do that for a lighting designer. But during the show, I have his talkback only going to his direct lighting tech. That way, if he's got to shout to somebody, I don't hear it because I don't need to hear lighting instructions during a show. I need to hear so-and-so needs the bass turned up, so-and-so needs to click down, whatever. So with that in mind, we're going to get into bleed. Bleed was another great Q&A question I had last week, or last time. Feels like last week. It's a tough topic. There's a lot of ways to deal with it. I always find that the more stuff you add to somebody's mix, the less invasive bleed will be. So for this example, we're going to use my experience with Fifth Harmony. Fifth Harmony is was a 5-piece band, but when I worked for them, they were a 4-piece. 4 girls dancing, along with a fantastic 3-piece band and a playback, which filled out keyboard stuff, drum loops, stuff like that. And they're all over the stage, wild mics everywhere. But what they were really great about is learning where to put their microphone when they weren't using it or when they're dancing. So in a lot of ways, bleed is going to be helpful because it's going to give the artist audible feedback about what their microphone is picking up. And I will typically tell musicians, especially mobile musicians with a wireless mic, what you're pointing at is what's going to come out in the PA most of the time. There are ways to deal with bleed physically. If you've got a stationary musician, you can use tools such as an opto gate, which goes between the microphone and the XLR cable. And it uses lighting feedback. It's not always the most accurate thing because musicians sometimes wear darker colors, and with flashing lights, it can get confused. But that's a really great tool for stationary musicians. But if they're moving around, the auditory feedback they're getting from pointing the microphone around is going to tell them where they should not point that microphone. If they're standing in front of the drums, if they hear a lot of cymbal, they're going to move the mic on their own. David Draymond in Disturbed is great for this. He likes to play with, like during guitar solos, he likes to run up to the drum riser and play with Mike Wengren, the drummer, a little bit, and stick the mic into the cymbals. He knows he's doing that. But other times, when he's just headbanging, he'll stick the mic behind him. And the girls were great for that too. They did a lot of great things when they would dance, where they would creatively move their arm with the choreography, because they would know the drum set is upstage right. So if their choreography took them upstage right, they would work it into their choreography to move the microphone around. And it was a really great working relationship between myself and the dance choreographer. It wasn't always feasible because sometimes we didn't have the same stage sizes. This show that I'm going to be using is from a performance the girls did and I did in Tokyo. It was for it was sort of a reward for a social program that a bunch of young volunteers were a part of, and called Rock Corps. And the stage was set up like a television production in a lot of ways. So our normal spacing requirements weren't always met, but the girls were still very good about their usual moving the mic to where it needed to be. But this was also in an aircraft hangar, so some of the bleed is unavoidable. So what I'm going to do is demonstrate a couple different things that you can do. I don't always recommend them, and in this case I probably would only do one of them, but it'll give you an idea what to do. You can do some things such as very light gating. So what we'll do is we'll go into our singer Allie Brooks' microphone here. She's a very super strong singer, and in this case a gate is somewhat helpful, but like I mentioned, it's not the most helpful thing in the world, because singers use inflection, there's variances with stage and stuff like that. But let's take a listen to hear what that sounds like.
What? Sing to me!
All right, so that gives you an idea. So let's listen to that in the context of her mix.
What? Sing to me! Put your hands in the air! Come on!
So it's not too overwhelming, but you don't want surprises for your singers, and sometimes gates opening will kind of create a false sense of security, and then suddenly when a cymbal breaks open that gate, they'll hear it. Or other times, if they're going to sing quietly and the gate doesn't pop open, you're going to get some dirty looks because they're going to wonder why their microphone's not working. So in this case, I would not use a gate. So let's take that out. And in this case, I've also been using on the Soundcraft, you either get the choice mode of gate or DS. So we're going to put the de-esser back on. And what I'm using that for is not only for sibilance, but it also helps with cymbals a little bit too, because it behaves sort of like a multiband compressor in a lot of ways. So let's listen to that in context, and I'll let it play a little bit longer because there's some moments where she walks around the drum kit and you'll hear it.
What? Sing to me! Put your hands in the air! Come on! There you go! We gotta get out, can't stay in the house, 'cause the party's going every weekend. Turn up, baby, burn up, and here's how we roll. We're rolling. Pull your camera out, 'cause someone's gonna wanna see this. Take a picture, snap it, hey, post it for the world. 'Cause when we going out, we run town, better believe it. We'll be sexy, sexy.
So like I mentioned, you're going to get a lot of sibilant stuff with moving people, but the de-esser helps kind of clear some of that up. The other thing that I mentioned is putting more stuff into a mix. If you've got an artist that will be open-minded with stuff like that, if they want to hear the music going along, that will help them tremendously. So let's try something real quick. I'm going to run that same segment of the song, and I'm going to take stuff out. And you'll notice immediately how how her mix sort of falls apart. And I've switched over to this other camera, and it looks like the glitching has stopped, so that's good. So I'm going to start taking elements out of her mix, and you'll hear immediately how the stuff helps cover up the bleed.
We what? Sing to me!
Let's say she doesn't want to hear that guitar.
Put your hands in the air! Come on! There you go! We gotta get out, can't stay in the house, cause the party going every weekend. Turn up, baby, burn up, in and in. Here's how we roll. Rolling, rolling. Pull your camera out, cause someone's gonna wanna see this. Take a picture, snap it, hey,
And then
post
putting
it
stuff
for
back
the
in.
world. Cause when we going out, we run the town, better believe it. We'll be sexy, sexy, yeah. Me and my girls, girls, girls. Oh, this is how we roll.
1, 2, 1.
Thank you. How we roll.
This is also a band that I did not need to use hardly any crowd mics with because of the enjoyment and the young age of the crowd. The crowd was typically louder than the PA in a lot of situations, and I really felt for our front of house guy. But his take on it, which is a great take, is if they want to hear it, they will keep their volume down. And so he never, during sound check, went over a certain dB. And it usually worked, with the exception of show-off parts like that, where Ellie really got to show her range as a vocalist. So those are some of the ways I deal with bleed. There's creative EQing that you can do as well. You know, I'll typically always low pass a vocal, usually down to about 10 or 9K. Just kind of shave off some of that high end. Maybe shelf some of it off as well, because, you know, typically the core of a voice is not going to get past that in most situations, and also that's where a lot of sibilance lies, and that can really take over a mix in some cases if there's a lot of sibilance in somebody's voice. I, for one, while I'm not a great singer, with my little bit of a lisp, anytime I have to contribute backing vocals for a song or something like that, I always find myself de-essing really, really heavily. So with that, we're going to move on to the next topic at hand, and it's something that I've mentioned a lot, and that is spares. Spares will save your life, and they will save your gig. Oh, man. Being at a show without spares is like swimming with sharks in a full, you know, fish costume. It's scary. It's not fun. And usually those are going to be the shows where something goes wrong. So if you've got the option and the budget, always plan for spares. I always put it into my rack drawings when I'm ordering gear because it's happened to me once and it'll never happen again. It's the ultimate insurance for a show. And one of the best things I've ever learned for that, once you do have your spare set up, is rather than having a spare channel, I don't like doing that. I don't like having spare mixes, really, because, you know, everybody's mix is fine-tuned for that person. And you don't want to just have a willy-nilly mix sitting around to give to somebody that just wants, you know, guitar in their mix or something like that, and you've got to rush to fix that. So how do we do that? We set up matrices. So what I've got here on this blue fader is a matrix along with my primary aux mixes. Oops, we just lost that camera. My beautiful assistant is going to come and fix it in just 1 second. So once that gets back on, thank you. There we are. So I always like having my outputs right in the center. And so what we do is we'll set up a matrix send, and that's really easy on a Soundcraft. You go to your output page and go to your output page. Just 1 second here. Need to get it there. There we go. So you get to your mix setup, and it will show up on your right screen here, and you've got towards the bottom a line that says type, channel pan, and format. So what we'll do is under the type segment, you've got the options for aux, group, or matrix. And that's great because it's all right in front of you. So what we'll do is we'll twist the knob all the way over to the right and set it to matrix, which it's already done because I've got this blue strip here. And then what we'll do is we're going to assign stuff to this matrix. And in this case, since it's the spare matrix, I'm going to put my primary vocalists on here. And in that case, for Fifth Harmony, it's Ali, Lauren, Dinah, and Normani. So you've got your source segments here. I've got all of that set up on my right side, as we can see. So on the first line, in the same set of knobs where you saw your type select, you've got your source select. So we'll click those, click the little plus sign here, and in front of you you'll have mix left, right, center, and then all your aux sends, but you can also set up local, stage, rack, direct outs, etc. But in this case we're using aux send, so I've got Ali, Lauren, Dinah, and Normani set up here. They're all set to 0, so if the worst were to happen, all we have to do, I'm going to run that right now. Let's go to a different example. I bet you want to hear something else. So, okay, we've got Ali dancing, and she has lost her pack. And with pop groups, they typically will have different costumes, different outfits for every show, and you got to get creative about where to put the wireless pack. A lot of times, it just went in the bra strap, and sometimes it would fly out of the bra strap, and so I would always have a spare on hand, just in case. So, Allie's doing her thing, no problem. And then all of a sudden the worst happens, like I said. So I hand the wireless pack to the production assistant or wardrobe person who's usually standing next to me in this case. And then what do? I turn her send on. And there it goes. 0 downtime. So there's 0 downtime and 0 change. They don't have to adjust their wireless pack. We always made sure that the wireless packs were at 12 o'clock, so there was never any variance. We always ordered, because it was always a lot of fly shows, we would always order Shure PSM 1000s and try and make things as consistent as possible for them, so there was no change. And so run the pack out, pop it back in, and it's as if nothing happened. So while that's happening, though, you're without a spare, you say. So what you do is you're going to repurpose the output of Ali and have a second matrix, a second spare matrix doing the exact same thing, but you change the output of that matrix to the now what was previously Ali's pack. So say Ali was outputs 1 and 2, you're going to make that second matrix outputs 1 and 2. You'll have to physically change it, and you'll have to take your eyes away from the show for a second, but if you're able to really memorize the desk, that's no problem. So in this case, what you'll do is you'll hit your output page and then go to the top portion where all your assignments are and go bus out patch, stage box 1 and 2. Or if it's a local desk, if it's coming out of the local, then you go outputs or line 1 and 2. Easy. So that's how I handle spares. You got to have them. They're necessary. Same with microphones. As I mentioned in the Q&A last week, I typically will not do a spare channel for a lead singer. I will either have it on a switch that is just a multi-selector, usually a 3-to-1, or I will have, in the case of Soundcraft, you've got your multi-inputs in your... Get out of the matrix here. In your main page. So say I lose a vocal mic. Well, in the case of the VI series, you just click the top portion of your channel strip, bottom or top left corner of the page that pops up in blue, you've got input. There's either in 1 or in 2. So when you patch your desk in Soundcraft world, in the bottom middle, you've got in 1 patch and in 2 patch. So all you have to do, oh shoot, they're grabbing the spare. Boom, popped over, instantaneous. It's going right down the same channel strip, and they won't even know. It's as long as you've got those 2 wireless mics, for instance, set up the same, your singer will have no idea of the magic you just pulled. And that's one of the best tricks ever, is when they're like, how'd you do that so fast? Don't worry about it. We're magicians. So next up, we're going to manage multiple lead singers. We're talking about Fifth Harmony, and in my experience working with them, there were 4. It's tough. You've really got to be eagle-eyed, because unless you've had a lot of rehearsal time, which I didn't, I came in working for them on a fly day. Their previous engineer had been let go. I flew in from another show. I had time with the band, and then one by one the girls came out. They told me their individual wants and needs and made it happen. And then they sound checked, they were happy, and then we did the show. And with all the screaming kids out front, some things changed. Of course, it's never always going to be the same from sound check to show, but it's a good preparation anyway. So what I found is that people typically sing quieter at sound check than they do at show. It's usually going to be the case. It's not always, but it's good to think about. It's just like the meme that goes around for guitar players that I've been seeing in my sound guy circles. It's the guitar player at sound check and the guitar player at show. Cranking that. You just got to keep an eye on your gain structure, and I always like having the output or the input section of my desk in front of me as well. That way I can see everything all at once, and if something looks outside of the realm of where I've been setting my gain structure, then I know to turn it down because it's going to mess their mix up. But really the best thing to do is, like I mentioned before, memorize the layout of your desk. And in the case of the VI series, you've got 5 user layers to play with. So you can put things anywhere. In my case, for today, I've got all the drums on layer 1, guitar, and on layer 2 on the left, and all the keyboards on the other side. Actually, let me pull that camera open. So, drums all here, reverb return down at the end. Layer 2, guitars. Once again, I'm doing the Haas effect like I typically do with all my artists, because Lisa Lee, who played guitar for Fifth Harmony, is just one guitar, one input, Fender Deluxe, I think. And let me see if this song has got a little bit of guitar in it. It does. So let's listen to that. To reiterate, the Haas effect is delaying one side maybe about 12 milliseconds, and for in-ears anyway, it gives you plenty of spread to listen to. It's really a cool thing. And I'll turn it off. Down center. There's that width. So anyway, those are all going on here. Keyboards. And then we have the playback elements on the left, and then the girls on the right here, and then the third page are reverb, or fourth page are reverb returns, and I always have my primaries. I need to remember which camera to look at. Primaries down in the center, always, because they're going to be the ones that get my first priority, because they're my bosses. So that's one way to do it. Like I mentioned, and I'm looking at my bullet points here, keep your primaries right in front of you. If they're really needy, keep them on every layer, you know. So in case of drums, I've got these 4 extra down here. down at the end, and so it would be drums and then the girls. Guitar, keyboard, the girls. The playback, the girls. Reverb returns, and then the girls. That way they're always accessible, they're always in the same spot. Because you don't want to be getting yelled at by your boss and you have to flip between layers. You just want it to be instantaneous. So having that is great. The other thing to do with these layers is to prioritize things you need first. In this case, it's the lead singers. They're your priority. And then after that, what you would do is sort of make a layer of your most used channels, which I would use on layer 5 here. So in this case, it's set up for, it's still like defaulted. It's got my reverb returns, but after a while of working with an artist, I would have my most used faders. So maybe it's click is quite often, or I need to turn verbs on and off a lot. That would be next, and then primary singers. That way you've got everything laid out, and then you start to memorize it, and then they never have to wait, and that's great. So that's my ways of dealing with multiple lead singers, and it's not just multiple lead singers. It works for most every situation. Find your most used channels and put that on a layer. But you know, that's what those user groups are for. The user layers are for, because no one works the same. Customization is great for audio. So, next up, we're going to talk about the fun task of mixing with in-ears and wedges. Oh, this thing has gotten me a couple times. I've been in situations where one person is not wearing ears, but the rest of the band is. But 90% of the time I'm working with all ears all the time. But sometimes they want to pull their ears out, and that's fine. But in the case of Fifth Harmony, we had side fills, but what we used those for was for emergencies. Like I mentioned before, we had situations where the girls would dance out of their packs. We've also had situations where the in-ears would fall out because that pack went flying, or gets caught in their hair or something. I've had that happen with Zakk Wylde. The band has a lion's mane, and suddenly with all the twisting around and stuff, maybe the clip to his shirt came loose and his ear gets pulled out. And he's not going to stop playing guitar. He's going to keep playing. So you got to run out there and fix it. But in the meantime, you don't want to be caught not having a way for him to hear what's going on. So the side fills were super essential. And some artists might not want them all the time. With Disturbed, they want the sight lines. They don't want side fills. They want a quiet stage. That's okay. We keep plenty of spares nearby, and it's usually not been an issue. But it also works on a sonic standpoint. Having side fills or wedges in front can also help fill out your mix. What I'll typically do for artists that are going to keep their ears in the whole time, but still want the look of the wedge or like putting their feet up, I'll low pass filter it down to about 500 just so they can get some of that feeling to fill out their mix, so they keep their foot up on the wedge the whole time. Or for bass players, I really find that throwing kick and their bass into the side fill really helps round out the low end in their mix that maybe they're not going to be able to hear that well in the in-ears, depending on either the driver situation or just maybe they're not built enough to have enough low end, or they're not getting enough response from the front of house mix that helps either save or ruin your mix in some situations. The other fun trick to do with that is to try messing around with the polarity switch on the output to your side fill mix, especially in clubs, because they're not always going to be wired the same. They're not always going to be, sometimes you won't have the good fortune to carry your own wedges and own side fills. And I find that also with most situations, if you're not carrying your stage, the stage surface matters tremendously, because what the artist feels in their feet is also going to affect kind of what they hear up here. So side fills and flipping the polarity around sometimes will help pump up that mix a bit more in their ears or take it away. I also find that throwing side fills around, if it's for the benefit of one person, you can pretty well just pair your side fills rather than have them separate. That way, no matter what side of the stage they go to, it's going to be the same. You know, you've got the option to have like matrix sends where, you know, if you've got an artist that's running around the stage and not wearing in-ears, you can change where the mix goes. But I haven't had to do that in a long time, and that's a lot of work, and it winds up being problematic because then you need to switch over to other people's situations as well. But that's what I typically like to do in that situation. So yeah, it's been a quick course. We've got, I think Mallory, I'm gonna open it up to the Q&A now. Thank you guys for hanging out with me. I'm looking forward to your questions.
Hello. So it doesn't look like we have any questions yet.
Excellent.
You did such a good job at explaining everything.
I guess so.
So we'll give it a couple minutes and see if any come through.
Yeah, if you guys want to, if you have any questions for me, please feel free to stick them in the Q&A section. I'll be happy to answer them.
I comment that you were
Tiffany.
pretty thorough.
My favorite part of live audio. I like the challenge of the day-to-day. You know, it's never gonna quite be the same. It's not ever very routine. On tour, you find yourself having to make adjustments, finding out that what you did the night before didn't work the way the artist wanted, and so you come up with solutions for the next day to make it the way they want. Sometimes your position, and especially as a monitor engineer, and especially on the club circuit, will change. I was just recently in Cincinnati, Ohio. I took a socially distant ghost tour with my girlfriend, and we wound up at a theater, an abandoned theater in Cincinnati, and I found myself going to work mode. And when we got to go up onto the stage, I immediately went to stage left and said, all right, where would I put my console today? And where would Guitar World go, and how would we play nice together, stuff like that. So I find the challenge of it just never being the same every day to be really appealing to me. And it's a creative process too, you know, making decisions that affect the enjoyment of the general public is also kind of fun too, you know, working in conjunction with an artist.
So it looks like we're getting some through chat and Q&A. So I will flip to Q&A and start asking a few of them, if that's okay, Ashton.
That's
great.
fine.
The first one is, what console are you using?
So today we have in front of me the VI 2000 that Harmon was very generous in sending me so I could do these webinars for you guys. Here it is right here. You know, it's got everything I need and not much that I don't. Great built-in effects, care of Lexicon, so they sound fantastic. You know, you've got 24 faders here in terms of fader banks, and then all the user layers. It's a pretty great console.
Great. The next question is, why would you send a mix to the lighting engineer and not front of house engineer?
So the front of house engineer is has his own mix, or you're asking why the front of house engineer wouldn't send his mix. It really depends, but a lot of it has to do with the fact that I can just do a talkback to his LD or to his technician on stage, and that way they have a clearer line of communication between each other. We'll run a talkback down the analog snake to front of house, and that way the front of house engineer can concentrate on doing their own thing. I've had it go the other way, where front of house will send their mix via a matrix to the LD, but I've also had engineers that don't want to pick up click in their console at all, and that can be problematic for an LD because they want that consistency, and they also want the most clicks will have a what's the word, a cue in it for what song it is, what parts are coming up, stuff like that. So I typically just will send it, and that's also a fun challenge too, because a lot of LDs like to stand up and dance and stuff. So there's a lot of viral videos of that. So I've also wound up perfecting my RF abilities by doing that and having a send out to front of house and with a wireless pack. But it can go either way. But it's just out of habit now. Most LDs come up to me and ask for a mix.
Perfect. So a lot more have come through. So the next one is, what are you yourself using to monitor the audio, wedge or IEM?
I will have a Q mix for myself, so I just hear the solo bus, if that's what they're asking. So, but during the prep time of the show, I will walk out with the artist's pack and stand in front of the wedge and stand in their position. And if I've got an iPad app that will allow me to do that, or I'll just run back and forth, or if I have an assistant with me, we'll go back and forth between the polarity options. So for setup, sound check, or line check, I will take the artist pack and hear exactly what they're hearing. And that's typically why I will wear the same brand and type of in-ears as the artist, so I know exactly what they're hearing. But for showtime, I've got my Q pack. And if I don't have a Q pack, I'll typically monitor off the headphone output.
So I think you just answered the next one. It says, which brands of in-ears do you prefer or work best?
I have stuff from everybody. Right now I'm wearing my Jerry Harvey Audio Laylas, but I've got several different varieties that JH makes. I've got a couple Ultimate Ear as well. I have a pair of West Tones as well, but I typically find most of my artists are either using UE or JH.
Okay, great. There's a comment asking about will this be recorded later? And yes, it will be. It's on our YouTube channel, so you can look for it in a couple days. The next question is, what's the best way to set a drummer's talkback mic and ensure minimal bleed?
If they're going to be talking while they're playing, good luck, because that's just going to become a spot mic. I've had great luck just using, in the case of Disturbed, our drummer also sings, so I have him hitting an A-B switch, which he's really good about. And so if he needs to talk, he'll punch that A-B switch down to the B position. It's just like a guitar pedal, so you just press that down, and then he can talk to me or his drum tech and what have you. But if it's a drummer that's playing during the show and you need to hear him and he's like, turn up my guitar, turn up my kick drum, they'll just have to shout at you, and suddenly you'll hear it in your ears. I would just, maybe low pass, so you hear less of the cymbal, if anything. But
okay, great. The next question is, are all your IEM mixes in stereo or any mono?
In 95% of my experience, I find that I'm mixing in stereo. I've had a couple specifically request mono, but that was like a two-time thing, and I think my consensus is it tends to be older musicians, because they started on wedges and Texas headphones where they've got huge wedges behind them and they're not in stereo, so they prefer just hearing it down center. So 99% of the time I would say my mixes are in stereo, unless they're going to a wedge or something, in which case they'll be mono for the most part.
Perfect. I'm going to flip back to the chat because I saw a couple questions come through there.
Yeah.
The next question is, can you talk a little more about using LPF on side fills? I work a lot with a band that uses side fills for lead singers.
Yeah, I mean, if it depends on your situation. If your singer is using ears in addition to side fills, then it's just sort of to fill out better. I find that the concentration of energy, once you remove the high frequencies from it, it becomes more prevalent, I guess. And also, it's not going to mask the high-end quality they're hearing out of their in-ears in case the seal's not good or something like that. But if it's just a singer without ears for side fills, then that would be disingenuous. I would think you would want to give them all the clarity you can, without feedback. In which case, you would want to, spend time ringing them out and getting that vocal as loud as you can in the side fills, and then bring it back to where their needs are. I had a singer, which I mentioned in the last chat, who relied on 2 pairs of wedges and side fills, and it was the loudest show I've ever done in my life. I still have sort of bad dreams about how loud it was, but he loved it. Stood right in front of the mic and just, hey! And it registered 121 dB A-weighted, and whew, that's loud. But yeah, I mean, be creative. If you've got time to work with your artist, find out what they like, because that's your job as a monitor mixer. I always will high pass my outputs a bit. That way you can also get more headroom out of things. You're not pumping sub bass down something that doesn't need it. A lot of the times, especially in club situations, you're going to get plenty of low-end feedback, not feedback, but low-end response from the PA anyway, from the PA mix. So high-pass filtering, maybe even up to 60 cycles out of the side fills will allow your amps and the speakers to work better and be able to push more, because you're not pumping all this useless energy and power into the amplifiers. And same for the top end, and you'll, especially if you're carrying side fills, then, you'll have to do less maintenance on them if you're not pushing out all that high end either, And same for ears, that for wireless frequencies, pulling out the low end and some of the high end at like 16K will allow for better connection. But off the top of my head, I can't speak to the math on that, because it's been a while since I read that paper.
So there's a request. It says, may I look you up on LinkedIn for more information?
Yeah, I'm on LinkedIn. Feel free. Shoot me a message. Tell me that you saw me here, and I'll accept and go from there.
Perfect. That looks like all the questions I see in the chat. I want to thank everyone for joining us today. This was a great presentation, Ashton. I want to thank you for your time as well.
Thanks for having me, everyone. Thanks for checking it out. And,
we've got a couple more questions in Q&A if we want to stretch it to an hour.
I've got time.
Yeah, sorry, Tom. I must have missed those.
Yeah, these came in. What's your favorite desk to use as a monitoring engineer, and why? And I believe that means we're going to be at, you're using an Avid now, right?
I am typically using an Avid because with Disturbed, my previous show files were from a Avid profile, and when their new console came out, they are forward compatible, so it was the easiest situation rather than starting from scratch to make that move up. That being said, after my last couple months of having this desk in my house and finding out how great it sounds and how easy it is to work with, that might change. It takes me very little time to put a mix together, and finding where everything needs to be on this desk is super simple, and building a mix on the fly is also super simple. Everything's right in front of you. You click it and you're there. There's no sub-menus to have to dig through or separate pages for patching. You just click it and it pops right up.
Yeah, I mean, VIs in general have had, in terms of national touring and global touring, we tend to be more at monitor positions than anywhere, just partly because you've got a decent amount of view due to the amount of screens and the amount of faders up there. So, that's sort of our niche in the larger touring world these days.
Yeah.
We also have another question from Bruce Vinn, who asks, could you please elaborate more on how you would mix in-ear monitors for stereo for a singer that plays guitar and also wants his Vox and guitar and drums? Do you split left to right? You split to left, right.
I
think I see what you're saying.
Trying to understand what he's saying. I mean, I will typically, I'll, and I hope I answered the question right, because I'm just going to explain what I do anyway for a singer that plays guitar. If it's an electric guitar, I will always give them the benefit of having their guitar and their vocal pretty, on top of each other with a bed underneath if that's what they want. I've also had guitar player or singers with guitars that don't want to hear their guitars or don't want to hear their voice. It's really dependent. But I will, if he's speaking on the Haas effect splitting thing, then yeah, I will do that too because it gives them more excitement. And then sometimes if they're a stationary guitar player, I will wind up sort of panning the other instruments based on where they're standing on stage. So say there's another guitar player to their left, that guitar will get panned to the left a bit. Bass player to the right, pan that bass to the right a little bit, and then a drum mix because it's behind them. But that's really dependent. Some people don't want that. So as I'm sounding like a broken record here, but talk to your boss and ask what they want.
Yeah, my gut feel here is that it might have been asking us to perhaps do you put vocals on one side, biased to one side of the pan, and the instruments to the right. I'm not sure. Again, I'm not sure if I'm reading the question correctly.
I in my head, I wouldn't want that. So I wouldn't initially go for that. I would put the vocal up, down, center because because psychoacoustically, you're hearing your voice reverberate off your facial bones or off your skull anyway. So to hear it off to one side would screw me up, I would think, but it really depends. Musicians are funny people. They want strange things. So you just have to, and remember, like, mixing monitors is customer service, really. So if they want it, are you sure? Okay.
Are you using any sort of output processing on your in-ear mixes, either via plugins or anything else to either spread it or do anything, compress or anything, or are you just letting it go?
So I'll use a compressor in sort of an emergency sense, just in case something blows up on stage. That way it will hit a certain threshold and clamp down so people don't lose their hearing, because I don't want to be responsible for the deafness of a famous person. I've had people that want it like that, though, that want like a bus processed sort of CD mix, in which case I'll do that. For this presentation, I did, because I remembered, Allie always enjoyed having sort of that CD sort of quality in her mix, so let me see what I'm doing here. I'm pulling a bit of 400, a little bit of 140, and I've got a shelf around 6K just to get a little bit of airiness there, but no compression for this one. But yeah, it depends. Sometimes if, like I've mentioned in the previous presentation, if no one is particular enough that I need to make duplicates of channels to change the sound of the instrument, I can typically get what somebody's looking for via bus compression or bus EQ. It sounds really dark to me. All right, so pop a little, shelf at 6 to 10K to give a little bit of life to the mix. Or if I know that the singer or musician is sort of missing upper mid frequencies, I will compensate for sure. It sounds really boxy. Pull 500-600 out of there a little bit. That way you can fine tune the person's mix. But I don't typically always go for that right away. I'll wait for the input from the musician.
And I think we've got one last one in here. And again, I'm not sure exactly the question, so we can sort of discuss it. But how would you treat ambience or crowd mics? I'm not sure if that just is in terms of how much you're putting into the artist mix, or if you're doing any processing, but you can sort of elaborate on.
Yeah, so crowd mics are are a great thing. Crowd mics and ambient mics I consider to be two different concepts. Crowd mics are going to usually, for me, if I'm in charge of speccing the mics, they're always going to be shotgun mics pointed into the crowd. And they're not always going to be in the artist's mix unless they ask for it. I will put it down a VCA and have everyone's preferred level of crowd in their mix, but then the VCA I'll put up to 0 so that way it gets there. And I'll usually always do it for crowd participation points, put your hands together, or let me hear you sing, and the singer cuts out so they can hear the crowd sing. I always find myself low pass or high pass filtering up to almost 350 because they don't. Crowd is upper mid range for sure, and so I will pull a lot of that. I always find there's a lot of like honky mid range stuff to pull out too, and then I'll compress it to pull more of that crowd sound out. For ambient mics, typically I'll stick those off to the side of the stage, or if it's just for like one person, I'll put maybe a stereo pair XY sort of at the position of where that person typically stands. If it's like a guitar player that needs it, I'll put them XY sort of just pointed up, and that way they sort of get their environment, and that will just always stay as a bed in their mix. That way they've got the feeling of not wearing in-ears, but they still are with the clarity. There's also options for like ported in-ears and stuff like that, but I would treat those ambient mics in a very similar vein, compressed a little bit less than I would a crowd mic, maybe 3-to-1 with just a tickle of compression, and pulling low mids and low pass filtering or high pass filtering out of there. That way they just sort of get their environment, their ambience, as you will.
And do the Disturb guys, are they into having more sort of ambient and crowd stuff going on, or they want nothing?
No, it's all crowd. I've got 2 pairs of shotgun mics for them. I have 2 or 1 on each corner of the stage, and then I have a stereo shotgun down center that is just for David when he's singing down there. That way he can hear what's happening in front of him, in case people are clapping extra loud or somebody's shouting at him about something when he's talking, so he can hear what's going on. And then the rest of the guys get just an overall mix blend of the 4 channels. But it's the same situation. They only want to hear it when it's necessary. In between songs, crowd participation points, sing-alongs, put your hands together kind of thing. Top of show, ambience, stuff like that gets them pumped up when they get their ears in and they're backstage and they can hear the crowd getting warmed up. We usually play there's a video that plays before the show on the 90-foot LED wall that we have, and when that plays, people usually go pretty nuts, and the guys are back there hearing it loud and proud in their ears, and they get pumped on that.
Mallory, can we go another few minutes?
Yeah, of course.
Okay. One other question that came in, and more sort of is from basically if someone has not been on ears before, do you have any advice in terms of transitioning from wedges to ears? And the question verbatim is, any advice for an artist I work with who is new to ears?
Yeah, I mean, the thing that I've always asked artists is and my experience was the most notable one was getting Zakk Wylde on in-ears because he hadn't worn them before. And I just said, hey, what do you want to hear? Like I can build you like a musical bed like you're in the studio and your voice on top. And he's like, I want it to sound like I'm in the garden, Madison Square Garden, but it's empty. And so with that, I knew big reverb, swim in it. And I kept pushing the reverb up until he was happy. Can you put that on my guitar too? Yeah, you can put it on anything you want. Put it on his guitar. So I would just ask, and if they don't have any idea what they want, then play around with it if you've got time. The best thing to do in my experience is always to just build a bed, build sort of like a CD mix, especially if it's a singer. If you got two guitars, hard left, hard right, drums, and overheads, pan, stuff like that, and then sort of sneak their vocal in, cue up a couple effects for them. I find that sort of a long plate verb does really well for vocalists. Some people like a chorus on their voice, like an eventide, or in the case of this desk, you've got several different modulation effects from Lexicon on here that you could try, whether it's flange or chorus or what have you. So have those ready and just push them up, and if they like it, then you're off to the races, and if they don't, then try and figure out what they do want, because sometimes you don't know what they want, and they don't have a way of communicating it. I think I said this example last time, but there was a drummer once who kept saying, man, I want it to be more yellow. I want it to sound more yellow. And we're like, yellow? What is this guy talking about? And we found out that at a certain point in the show, the lights are yellow. And for whatever reason, he loved how it sounded when those lights were yellow. And we found out that the front of house guy was pushing some more verb into the house, and that was reverberating onto the drum riser a little bit, and that filled him out. So what we did is we wound up putting a sub under his riser and pumping that up at an angle so it would shake the whole riser rather than having a butt thumper. And so, yeah, sometimes you got to figure out how to communicate with musicians sometimes.
And I would assume probably, going back to the previous question about ambience or crowd mics, sort of taking that into consideration when you're doing the transition is going to be important, because they're going to be more isolated than they would ever have been before on wedges.
Exactly. And I would also counter to be a little sneaky with that, because if you're in a situation where you're in a different place every day, if you're like, say, a church musician, or it's something where it's going to be a stationary thing where they play the same place every day, then by all means put them in there and do it. But I've found that sneaking crowd mics in gently to people that have never used them before is sort of the way to do it, because they're going to get different environmental reflections and things like that from day to day, and that can throw people off immediately. So that would be my counterpoint. But yeah, crowd mics for sure are definitely something to invest in if you don't have any in your arsenal or in your touring package.
All right, and that looks like that might be it. So we'll give it over to Mallory for the official wrap-up.
Well, I just want to thank everyone again for joining, and thank you guys, Tom and Ashton, for the Q&A, and thank you, Ashton, for your presentation today. It was great to hear a second session from you.
Thanks for having me, guys. It's always
I hope everyone has a good rest of their day. Bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.